How long do you think you could go without use of your command key? I know that personally I would be lost without it because I am absolutely addicted to keyboard shortcuts. Well, if your command key or any other function of your keyboard is broken, the solution might just be replacing the entire uppercase. With the Unibody Macbook Pros, unlike previous versions, the keyboard is actually integrated into the uppercase, so replacing the keyboard means replacing the entire uppercase. Hi, I'm MJ with iFixit, and today I'm going to show you how to replace the uppercase on a 13-inch Unibody Macbook Pro. This video is a great overview of the process, but you're going to want to follow the step-by-step instructions and the repair guide on our site when you're doing your repair. The version that I'm working on is a mid-2011 version, and while the process is really similar for the previous iterations, it's different enough that you want to make sure to follow the repair guide specific to your model of computer. This is probably the most involved repair you can do on this computer, but it's totally feasible if you can carve out about an hour to get it done. That all being said, I'm going to gather up my tools and parts so I can begin. For this repair, I'm going to use a plastic spudger, a set of plastic opening tools, and a handful of screwdrivers, including a Phillips 00 screwdriver, a T6 Torx and a T8 Torx driver, and a Tri-Wing Y1 driver. Rather than getting all the separate drivers, I'm going to go ahead and use my 54-piece bit driver kit because it has all the bits that I need to get the job done. Of course, you're also going to need your replacement uppercase, and although it's not necessary, I'm going to use a screw tray because there are lots of tiny screws involved, and I want to make sure to keep them all organized. So, to get started, I'm going to go ahead and remove the lower case that is held in place by all of these Phillips screws along the bottom. Okay, so with the bottom off, we can see all of the guts in the MacBook Pro. And before I go any further, I'm going to disconnect the battery from the logic board because we want to make sure that there's no residual electricity running through the machine. So to do that, you're going to use your plastic spudger and kind of lift up the left side of the connector and then the right side of the connector like you're walking it out of the socket. Now that that's disconnected, the first piece that we're actually going to remove is the fan, and that's held in place by just a few Torx screws and one cable, so I'll go ahead and take those screws out. Okay, now the cable you want to be really gentle with because I've heard of a lot of people that have actually ripped the entire connector off the board. So when you're lifting up on the cable, you want to make sure to only be lifting up on the connector and not the socket that is actually stuck to the logic board. So be extra gentle during this step. Now that that cable's disconnected, the fan should lift out pretty easily, and the next thing we're going to do is get started on removing the logic board, and that's held in place by several screws and several cables. So I'm going to get started by disconnecting these cables right here. The next cable that I'm going to work on is the data display cable, and it's a little tricky. It's got this little latch that flips up right here, and after it's flipped up, you can just pull the cable right out. There's also a bracket down here that I'm going to remove while I'm here, and that's just held in place by a couple of screws. With this bracket out, I can get to work on all the screws that are holding the logic board in place. Okay, so that's the last screw, but before we can lift the logic board out, there's actually a microphone that's glued down to the case, so I'm going to use my spudger to loosen that, and then I can pull the logic board out. Okay. With the logic board out, the next thing we're going to remove is the battery, and that's just held in place by a couple of Tri-Wing screws and a little bitty sticker. So Tri-Wing is a pretty uncommon variety of screw. You might think, well, I'll just use a Phillips driver to take the Tri-Wing screws out, but doing that will only strip the screws, so make sure you're using a proper Tri-Wing driver. Okay, now that the battery is free, the next thing we're going to do is remove the hard drive. So we'll start by removing the hard drive bracket. And the screws that are holding the bracket in place are retaining screws, meaning they won't come out all the way. So just unscrew them until they're loose enough, and then the bracket should just lift right out. Once the bracket is off, the hard drive should lift out pretty easily, but it's still connected via this cable right here. So we'll go ahead and disconnect the cable and put the hard drive aside. And while we're here, we're going to go ahead and remove the hard drive cable entirely. So most of the cable is free, but part of it is actually adhered to the upper case. So I'm going to use my spudger to gently loosen the adhesive. I want to emphasize gently because you don't want to go tearing the cable. So just kind of work slowly, be patient, and eventually it'll come up. So I'll just go ahead and put the hard drive cable aside. And obviously, the next big thing for us to do is remove the optical drive. But before we can do that, we're going to have to disconnect and deroute some cables that are attached to the Bluetooth and airport board. So I'll go ahead and do that. Now that all those tiny little cables are disconnected and derouted, I'm going to go ahead and remove the screws that are holding the airport card and the speaker in place. Now we can lift these things up and actually have access to the screws that are holding the optical drive in place. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then I can remove the optical drive. Now that the optical drive is free, the next step is to remove the speakers, and then I can get to work on separating the upper case from the display assembly. So as I'm removing these screws from the hinges, I'm going to go ahead and leave one in each side. That way, when I do begin to separate the two, they don't just fall apart. I can have a little more control over it. So I'm going to go ahead and stand it up on its side and open it up just a little bit so it's more stable. Hold it with my hand so it doesn't fall over, and then remove the remaining two screws. So now that all the screws are out, I can carefully separate the two pieces, minding any cables that might get caught along the way. So the very last thing you might think about is that if you need to transfer your trackpad over to your new uppercase, you're just going to remove the screws that are holding it in place and transfer the trackpad over. Obviously, it's a big repair with lots of little pieces to keep in order, but if it extends the life of your MacBook Pro, I totally think it's worth it. Of course, you can find all of the parts and tools for this and many other repairs at iFixit.com. And if you run into any problems during your repairs, there are lots of solutions in the MacBook Pro Repair Guide on our site. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/iFixit. Thanks for watching and happy repairing.